In the year 1999, a phenomenal event occurred in the skies which altered the course of human history.
It's always eat or be eaten out in the battlefield, no matter who or what you're up against.
I have only spared you from total dissolution.
The aliens have taken hostages and are controlling their bodies. Listen, Ulala, we're taking off by Astrobeat spaceship right now.
Roger.
Oh yeah! This could be fun!
Look at you, hacker. A pathetic creature of meat and bones.
I can foretell many things in the future. So, let's see your future.
I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
I'm not the boy.
Neo Geo Pocket Color 新登場
The convenience of playing video games anywhere and on the go has increased substantially over the course of the past decade. Phones, hybrid consoles, and handheld computers have dominated the portable gaming experience over the years. Traditional home console experiences are no longer limited by the confines of what was hooked up in your personal living quarters. The evolution of portable gaming has seen many hardware innovations over the years from multiple different companies, but for the longest time, it was Nintendo that dominated the portable market with their family of Game Boy consoles. The 90s saw multiple attempts at becoming a better alternative to the Game Boy, but the Game Boy outsold all the attempts regardless of what innovations they offered. 1999 saw two handhelds introduced to the world that aimed to innovate and take portable gaming to the new millennium. One of those handhelds was developed by the same engineer responsible for Nintendo's Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi. Gunpei Yokoi worked for Nintendo long before Nintendo became a video game company. He was hired by Nintendo in 1965 to help with the manufacturing of their Hanafuda cards, which had been a staple of the company since 1889, when they were known as Nintendo Koppai. During this time, Nintendo had been a family-run business run by the Yamauchi family. In 1949, Hiroshi Yamauchi, grandson of then president of Nintendo, Sekiryo Yamauchi, inherited the position of president when Sekiryo left the company due to a stroke. The 21-year-old Hiroshi would only accept the offer if he was the only family member working for the company. Sekiryo reluctantly accepted the terms of the deal as there was no one else in the family that could succeed him. Hiroshi would spend the next decade transforming the business from a family-operated Hanafuda card company to a company that sold unique toys. Gunpei Yokoi was at the forefront of this business model change, and would be tasked with mass-producing a toy Yokoi had designed in his spare time, the Ultra Hand. The Ultra Hand would be Nintendo's first mass-produced gadget. Yokoi would follow up with more successful gadgets like the Tumbler Puzzle, the Ultra Scope, and the Ultra Machine. Nintendo's toys marked a new beginning for the company throughout the 70s, until Yokoi was tasked with producing a new gadget that wasn't just simply a toy, the Game & Watch series. These handheld electronics would become one of the first video games released and developed by Nintendo. The Game & Watch series was released in Germany and Austria under the Tricotronic name and released in North America under the name Time Out. The North American release of Game & Watch was handled by the Mego Corporation, famous for their line of toys based on famous movies and television shows from the 70s. Yokoi would later develop a unique component to be used alongside the Famicom and released as a launch peripheral for the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America and Europe, Rob, the Robotic Operating Buddy. Next for Yokoi would be the successor of the Game & Watch series, the Game Boy. But Yokoi's original vision of the Game Boy was not what Nintendo released. Yokoi's version of the Game Boy would have been closer to Milton Bradley's Microvision in terms of hardware and game potential. The Game Boy we actually ended up with came from Yokoi's assistant director in his research and development team, Satoru Okada. Like Yokoi, Okada was hired by Nintendo in 1969 under Hiroshi Yamauchi, and long before Nintendo became as big of a company as it is today. Okada would become the director of successful Nintendo titles like Metroid and Kid Icarus. Having first-hand experience with what the Nintendo was capable of, Okada wanted the Game Boy to be more than just a handheld electronics gadget like the Game & Watch. Okada's vision of a portable device that offered long-term, high-quality variety contrasted with Yokoi's vision of a portable device that offered quick pick-up-and-play experiences. Okada ultimately was able to convince Yokoi to go along with his idea, and against Yokoi's personal objections, signed off on what would become Nintendo's most successful release until the Nintendo DS about 20 years later. Yokoi's next product would be his last for Nintendo, the ill-fated Virtual Boy. The hard-to-see, hard-to-comfortably play device would mar Yokoi's reputation, especially in the face of Nintendo's more highly anticipated and more impressive Nintendo 64. After this, Yokoi would retire from Nintendo and form a new company with many of the people who had worked with him for so long. This company would be called Koto Laboratory. Koto Laboratory entered a partnership with Bandai to produce a new portable device to rival the Game Boy, as well as the recently released Game Boy Pocket, the WonderSwan. Sadly, in October 1997, Gunpei Yokoi was killed in a car accident. Before its official public reveal, the WonderSwan would end up becoming the last product developed by Yokoi, whose engineering changed the landscape of Nintendo as a whole, which was a huge part in Nintendo revitalizing the video game industry in the 80s. The WonderSwan would officially be revealed a year later, offering the ability to play games vertically or horizontally. The button layout on the device made it possible to play certain games both ways. Strong third-party support from companies like Squaresoft, Koei, Capcom, Sunsoft, Konami, and Bandai's own catalog, which included games in the Digimon franchise. The timing of the WonderSwan's eventual release would coincide with the premiere of the anime Digimon Adventure. Koto Laboratory would also develop select games for the WonderSwan. One of those games would be regarded as one of the system's best titles, Gunpei, a puzzle game involving tiles with a Wild West aesthetic, and was one of the WonderSwan games that was meant to be played vertically. It was named after Gunpei Yokoi. The WonderSwan also introduced web browsing capabilities long before any other portable gaming device did. The WonderSwan was released in March 1999 in Japan, and was marketed as being more powerful than the Game Boy, more affordable than any of the color counterparts that tried to compete with the Game Boy in the past, and with arguably the most robust third-party library on a portable device. Unfortunately, the timing of WonderSwan's release was not in their favor, as 5 months earlier, the Game Boy Color was released. The uphill battle became even greater with the Game Boy Color in the market, and the WonderSwan sold poorly in comparison. In December 2000, the WonderSwan was updated with the WonderSwan Color. With improved specs, backwards compatibility, and still strong third-party support, which included a well-received remake of the first Final Fantasy games, the WonderSwan Color still did not sell well. Finally, in July 2002, the WonderSwan Crystal was released, featuring the biggest improvement to the display monitor compared to other portable consoles at the time. 3 months earlier, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance. The WonderSwan was still regarded in retrospective reviews as a niche competitor that exemplifies the design philosophy of Gunpei Yokoi, an engineer who sought to create unique experiences meant to entertain people of all ages. And while Bandai and Yokoi's Koto Laboratory did what they could to innovate the portable gaming experience, the Neo Geo brand would step up to take on the portable gaming market. And unlike the WonderSwan, this attempt would be experienced by players all over the world. The Neo Geo began as a console famous for having the best ports of SNK's arcade library, specifically when compared to the more popular ports of arcade games that had been released on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. The console was designed by Takashi Nishiyama. Nishiyama started his game industry career at Irem. This was during the time where multiple game companies were trying to make the next big video game that would match the popularity of Space Invaders. Nishiyama's first game was Moon Patrol, but it was his next game that caught the attention of Capcom, Spartan X, released in the States as Kung Fu Master. After being recruited into joining Capcom, he was able to improve on what he did in Spartan X to create the first game in what would become one of the biggest fighting game franchises in the game industry, Street Fighter. Nishiyama left Capcom shortly after, making the first Street Fighter his one and only contribution to the franchise. He would soon join SNK and would be the director of yet another fighting game that would grow into a popular fighting game franchise, Fatal Fury: The King of Fighters. But his biggest contribution to SNK would be his role in leading the production of the Neo Geo, as well as his influence on how SNK sold their games to arcade retailers. He proposed that instead of one arcade cabinet of a game for each business, SNK would sell a cabinet that could read ROM cartridges of different games, which could easily be switched, thus creating a multi-game experience in one cabinet called the Neo Geo Multi-Video System. The console counterpart would officially be called the Neo Geo Advanced Entertainment System, and would be the closest to an arcade experience that the home console offered throughout most of the 90s. However, the Neo Geo AES and its games was among the most expensive in the market. While critically and commercially successful, it still reached limited audiences due to how expensive it was compared to the other home consoles. The Neo Geo MVS and AES were Nishiyama's only hardware contributions made to SNK. However, the Neo Geo would continue to release hardware to coincide with the generational jump between 16-bit and 32-bits. An affordable version of the AES would be released in most territories in 1994, the Neo Geo CD. The Neo Geo CD made the games much cheaper when compared to the AES, but the games played off the CDs were a lot slower than the cartridge counterparts. The Neo Geo CD only sold less than 1 million units in its lifetime. As games started to shift from 2D to 3D, requiring more storage space, the games that made SNK a household name would start to show its age compared to the 32-bit era of hardware. To support this shift, SNK released the Hyper Neo Geo 64, an arcade system board that could support much larger SNK-produced games. Unfortunately, only 7 games were actually produced for the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and only one of them got ported to the PlayStation, Fatal Fury: Wild Ambition. The Hyper Neo Geo 64 and the other 6 games made for it were only available in Japan from 1997 to 1999. This would be the last hardware system made by SNK for the home or arcade market. While one door closed for producing hardware that could keep up with the games of the late 90s, another door opened for the chance to rival the popularity of the Game Boy with the Neo Geo Pockets. The Neo Geo Pocket, like the WonderSwan, boasted higher specs and a better screen resolution when compared to the Game Boy. But also like the WonderSwan, timing was against the Neo Geo Pocket, as they released in October 1998, the same month as the Game Boy Color. Although the Neo Geo Pocket was praised in the media, it was not a commercial success, and with a limited launch and game library, it was quickly discontinued. However, as quickly as it was discontinued, it was quickly succeeded by a new version of the Neo Geo Pocket, the Neo Geo Pocket Color. The Neo Geo Pocket Color improved on many of the disadvantages of the Neo Geo Pocket. For starters, it launched with 14 games in Japan. At the time, no console or handheld launched with that many games. A partnership with Sega gave the Neo Geo Pocket Color one of its most successful portable titles from Sega's biggest franchise, Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure. The same team that worked on Sonic Pocket Adventure would go on to form the company Dimps, which original Neo Geo hardware designer Takeshi Nishiyama would become the president of. The library of games from Dimps would include numerous Sonic games, starting with the Sonic Advance series of games for the Game Boy Advance. The Sega SNK partnership also led to the designing of a cable that would link the Neo Geo Pocket Color with the Dreamcast to exchange content between specific releases on the Dreamcast and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. SNK vs. Capcom, the match of the millennium, would also be one of Neo Geo Pocket Color's most critically acclaimed titles, getting a Nintendo Switch port in 2021 as part of the Neo Geo Pocket Color selection. The Neo Geo Pocket Color also supported games originally released on the Neo Geo Pocket. While not as affordable as the WonderSwan, it was still a cheaper alternative to the Game Boy Color. The Neo Geo Pocket Color also had the innovations that were introduced in the Neo Geo Pocket, like the analog stick instead of the traditional D-pad, as well as a BIOS menu that contained a real-time clock, a horoscope reader, a calendar, and an alarm setting. While the Neo Geo Pocket was only released in Japan like the WonderSwan, the Neo Geo Pocket Color got a worldwide release, starting in March 1999 in Japan, North America in May 1999, and Europe in October 1999. Despite the critical success, the Neo Geo Pocket Color still did not sell well. In 2000, SNK would be bought out by the Aruze Corporation, the company currently known as Universal Entertainment. Aruze was not interested in SNK's video games, thus all support for the Neo Geo family of hardware came to a screeching halt. Employees of SNK would soon join the likes of Capcom, Arc System Works, and Dimps. SNK would go through multiple corporate shifts over the years, but no brand new hardware in the Neo Geo family was released again, with the exception of retro Neo Geo consoles, including one of the earliest hybrid consoles, the Neo Geo X. Currently, SNK is owned by the MISC Foundation, a non-profit organization run by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. As of 2022, MISC Foundation controls 96% of SNK. The WonderSwan and Neo Geo Pocket Color were notable attempts at rivaling the critical and commercial success of Nintendo's Game Boy family of handheld systems from 1999. The WonderSwan exemplified Gunpei Yokoi's innovative way of thinking, which in part helped Nintendo give it the identity it needed to become the global video game industry juggernaut that it became in the 80s. While the Neo Geo Pocket Color pushed what type of games were possible on a handheld, and with more worldwide long-lasting support. And the legacy of that handheld leading to compilation titles released exclusively on a console from a company that Gunpei Yokoi helped elevate with his innovative hardware ideas. The overlap of hardware innovations between Nintendo and SNK gave 1999 one of its most exciting years in portable gaming. New ways to experience portable gaming, unique opportunities to change the landscape of portable gaming, paving the way for all the innovations over the course of the next 25 years that would make portable gaming more accessible and more limitless than how it used to be.
Play Silent Hill. You may never leave your lane again for PlayStation from Konami.
Silent Hill. Composed by Akira Yamaoka and Rika Muranaka. As soon as you heard that mandolin in the beginning, you knew right away you were in for something special. Resident Evil had dominated the survival horror genre for nearly the entire decade. Right at the end of that decade, Silent Hill would come and give the genre a different and possibly more terrifying take on the genre. The horror wasn't represented by something straight out of George Romero films. It was the unseen. It was the ambience. It was the grotesque. And a lot of it was driven by the music of Akira Yamaoka. He didn't just compose the music, he did all of the audio work as well, and he was the first to volunteer for the opportunity to work on Silent Hill because he strongly believed he was the only one capable of giving Silent Hill the experience it deserved. He drew inspiration from Twin Peaks composer Angelo Badalamenti and industrial music to create the music, which was far more ambient than melodic. In fact, nearly the entire soundtrack could be viewed as one very long piece if listened to back to back. Some of the music was so creepy and atmospheric, the Konami staff thought that the audio was glitched. When Yamaoka explained that his compositions sounded the way they did on purpose, they allowed him to continue. He didn't rely on the images of the game to help him compose. He composed everything separately. The only piece not to be composed by Yamaoka was one of the ending themes, FMVault. Rika Maranaka had already written music for Konami hits Symphony of the Night and Metal Gear Solid at that point of her career. The vocals were performed entirely in Spanish by Vanessa Quiroz. The song was written in English and translated into Spanish, but because of the English to Spanish translation, the melody did not match the lyrics. Fortunately, it only took Maranaka 5 minutes to revise the lyrics to match the melody. Akira Yamaoka had been working for Konami since 1993, with his first games being Contra Hard Corps and the Rocket Knight Adventure games. It wasn't until Silent Hill where he established himself as one of Konami's most prominent composers. By creating some of the most terrifying audio heard in a video game, he literally defined the experience of Silent Hill more than any other composer could define the experiences of the games they composed.
Them. They hunt you. Dino Crisis from the makers of Resident Evil.
PlayStation.
Where's that little sweetheart? Come here! Let him he wants to give you a kiss!
Wouldn't it be cool to be Buzz Lightyear? Now you can be Buzz in the new Toy Story 2 video game. Use lasers and whirling torso spins to save the day. Jump, swing, and somersault through the air with special rocket jet and moon spring boots.
There you are!
In the new Toy Story 2 video game, you are Buzz Lightyear. Life is good.